you walk into a room, it's your choice to turn the lights on or leave them off. When there's sunlight all around you, it's your choice to keep your eyes open or shut. It's a person's own choice to embrace the light or keep their eyes shut to it. That is not the light's doing. That is the personal choice of that person. One can be and is surrounded by this being of infinite light, love, joy, and compassion. But if they refuse to open their eyes to this being, if they plunge themselves into darkness by shutting their eyes, stopping their ears, and refusing to acknowledge his existence surrounding them, how is that his fault? They create their own darkness. They put themselves into a torment which does not need to be. What is energy? It's a really interesting question because the definition of energy we learn in school, the ability to do work, is wholly inadequate to what we know it to be in reality. We know that everything which exists ultimately is a form of energy. We know that every particle of matter is really just a one-dimensional string of energy vibrating at a certain frequency and a certain spin. So energy really is the foundation, the building blocks of everything we experience as existing. All matter and everything which that matter comprises is ultimately energy, which has been organized into a specific form and specific combinations of different forms. As a result, energy is literally everywhere at once. Even when we take something down to the 0 point, removing all energy from a vacuum, there is still the presence of energy and particles popping in and out of existence. In other words, it is omnipresent. We know that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can change forms, but it cannot be created or destroyed. In other words, it is eternal. Energy might be considered finite in a finite universe, but in what many now believe is an infinite multiverse, there must also be an infinite, unbounded, limitless amount of energy in order for that infinite multiverse to exist. Infinite, eternal, omnipresent, and the source or foundation of all created existence. Energy is also the source and spark of life, as something is not considered alive without that electrical form of energy coursing through its biological circuitry. We're already halfway there to something that sounds very much like the being people very much want to deny exist. How can the source of life itself not be alive? I'm sure an argument can be made against it, but it is a question to ponder. What's really interesting is that all of these qualities we know to be true by energy, the ancient Stoics attributed to pneuma, what we translate as spirit, and which they refer to as a fiery breath, something which we cannot see, but the effects of which we can feel. So let's take this one step further and assume that energy, the source of life and underlying foundation of everything which exists, is itself alive. Would that being not be, by its very nature, omnipotent? Because of its extremely intimate contact with all that exists, being literally the substance which gives everything form, would it not by nature be omniscient? Knowing by nature the movement and location of every particle of matter and carrier of energy which exists. Honestly, we're already there at this point in describing such a being, though I'm not sure the word God quite covers it. It is, in fact, quite the understatement. So what would this being be like as a person? Should it be a person? Would it be selfish? Why? What would be the point of creating other beings then? No, I don't think so. I think it would be turned wholly outward and concerned with those beings. Would it make those beings like puppets? Again, why? What would be the purpose? No, it would make those beings, though dependent on the being's own existence for theirs, autonomous, with their own wills. Would it just create them and ignore them? Again, same question. Why? What would be the purpose? No, it would create them for interaction with someone or something other than itself. And wouldn't it then somehow try and communicate with those beings so that they could get to know it as a person of some kind? Is it that much of a stretch that it would try to make its mind known about what it considers to be the best way for those beings to interact with not only itself but with one another? There is a reason why we see such commonalities between the teachings of Jesus, the Buddha, Lao Tzu, the Stoic philosophers, and many others. There is a reason why we see the Golden Rule repeated across the ancient world in many different cultures. So there is this. Is it proof that God exists? No, but I think it's a damn good argument for it. Then there are the thousands of near-death experience testimonies of people, many if not most of whom do not claim to be Christian, who report being surrounded by overwhelming love and peace centered around a being of pure light, love, and infinite goodness, which many equate with a loving parent figure. One more thought. Referring back to those NDEs, while 75% of them are generally positive and they return profoundly changed for the better, about 25% of them are deeply negative, hellish even. Many of those 25% were professing Christians who experienced such a hellish NDE in addition to atheists and people of different faiths. My conclusion to this, based on what I've read, is that it isn't that these people had the wrong religious beliefs, as nearly every religious belief or lack thereof is represented, but it's that they were so caught up in themselves, their own interests, cravings, pettiness, and pride, that they shut their eyes to the light, that wanted nothing more than to embrace them and for them to accept its embrace. They were willing to play the part of good religious person, but it was only an act. Internally, they willfully blinded themselves to the being who is the source of love, and experienced the consequences. I confess, I don't understand people who adopt atheism after leaving their religious faiths. It's one thing to just not know or be ignorant of this being or source because of the way you were raised or lack of experience with him. But from my own experience, adopting atheism after you've experienced him in some way is akin to insanity, which only leads to a further downward spiral. It's heartbreaking for me to watch it happen, to be honest. Especially since the truth is, it is not a true atheism as much as it is frequently being so angry at God, or those who claim to represent him, so angry that you were hurt, that you do the most hurtful thing you can think of to him and pretend he doesn't exist. Does it hurt him? No, because his focus is entirely on you and not himself. His concern for you outweighs any pain anyone attempts to cause him. How does it hurt you? Because you are literally formed from him. He is the foundation, the substance of everything which exists, either matter or energy. Your very nature, apart from the body. The breath of God first breathed into human beings is literally born from him. You blind yourself to him, pretend he doesn't exist, and you have only your malfunctioning flesh to operate from as you respond from your misfiring, panic, aggression, feeding, and reproductive cravings. Understand this, if nothing else. This fear which drives the flesh's responses cannot exist where love is. And likewise, if you choose the flesh, you are choosing to operate from fear, aggression, and the body's cravings and rejecting any responses based on love. You will create attachments and mistake them for love. You will feel sexual desire and mistake it for love. Why? Because the flesh can only operate oriented to its cravings and perceived threats. But you will cut off all access to love itself because love is born from God. As the scripture says, God is love. What state will you ultimately find yourself in as you cut yourself off from the source of love? Fearful, angry, combative, avaricious, lustful, and above all, only able to respond based on how something makes you feel. By shutting yourself off from the light, you plunge yourself into darkness both in this life and in the next. Separated from the flesh upon its death and refusing to open your eyes to the light, what state will you be in when God is so clearly all there is around you? When your own union with him is so manifestly apparent, I can think of no greater darkness, no greater hell than this. No, I don't understand it at all. It is one thing to be raised an atheist and simply be ignorant. Ignorance is forgivable. It is another thing to allow your anger at transient and impermanent pain overwhelm you, so that you pretend he doesn't exist. The harm you cause yourself is overwhelming. I beg you in the name of love himself, turn around. Even if it has to be in the next life, turn around from this course and open your eyes again to him.